You walk into their home, and something happens before you can name it. There is no visual clutter pulling at your attention, no half-finished projects on the counter, no pile of things that belong somewhere else sitting in the corner, pretending to be temporary. Everything is where it is supposed to be, and without knowing why, you feel yourself exhale, like something in the room gave you permission to stop bracing. Now think about the person who lives there, because here is the question most people never ask. Not what does a clean house say about someone, but why? Why does order feel necessary to them in a way it simply does not for others? What is actually happening beneath the surface of the scrubbed countertops and the folded corners and the habit of never leaving a room without returning it to the way it was? Because it is almost never just about cleanliness. It is almost never simply a preference or a personality quirk or something they picked up from a particular parent. For many people, keeping their environment ordered is one of the most psychologically loaded things they do, and most of them have never once stopped to examine it. Let us start with what the research actually tells us about the relationship between physical environment and the human mind. There is a concept in environmental psychology called cognitive load. It refers to the amount of mental effort your brain is using at any given moment. And here is what decades of research have confirmed. The visual complexity of your environment directly affects the cognitive load your brain is carrying without you even being aware of it. Every piece of clutter in a room is a small, unresolved signal, an open loop, a thing your brain registers as something that needs addressing, categorizing, or deciding about. And when those signals accumulate, the mental cost accumulates with them. This is why a cluttered environment tends to elevate cortisol levels, the body's primary stress hormone. It is why studies consistently show that people report higher levels of fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and feelings of being overwhelmed in disordered spaces. The mess is not just aesthetic, it is neurological. The brain is working harder than it should have to simply by existing inside it. Now flip that understanding around. For people who keep their spaces clean and ordered, the environment does something different. It gives the brain permission to rest. It reduces the number of open loops. It lowers the ambient noise of unresolved signals. And in that quieter mental space, something becomes possible that is much harder to access in chaos. Clarity, focus, the particular kind of calm that comes not from the absence of problems, but from the presence of order in the one space you actually control. But understanding the neuroscience is only the first layer, because the more interesting question is not what a clean home does to the brain. It is what drives certain people toward cleanliness with an urgency that goes beyond preference. For some people, the answer begins in childhood, and it begins in a way that is rarely talked about honestly. Imagine growing up in a home where the external environment was unpredictable. Maybe the unpredictability was obvious. Addiction, anger, instability, chaos that was visible and loud and impossible to miss. Or maybe it was subtler than that. Emotional inconsistency, a parent who was warm one day and withdrawn the next. A household where the mood could shift without warning and you never quite knew which version of home you were going to walk into. In environments like these, children learn very quickly that they cannot control the things that matter most. They cannot control whether today is a good day or a bad one. They cannot control what the adults around them will do or say or feel. They cannot control the emotional climate of the space they are supposed to feel safest in. And that helplessness, especially when it is chronic, is one of the most distressing psychological experiences a developing mind can have. So the child finds something they can control, and very often, that something is their immediate physical environment, their room, their corner, the small square of the world that belongs specifically to them. And inside that space, they create the order that the larger world refuses to provide. They arrange their things with a care that is not really about the things at all. They clean as a way of establishing that at least here, in this small place, things are predictable. At least here, they know what to expect. Psychologists call this compensatory control. It is the process by which people who feel a loss of control in one area of life assert heightened control in another. And it is one of the most common invisible threads running through the lives of adults who feel a deep compulsion toward order and cleanliness. Not a preference, a compulsion. Something that feels less like a choice and more like a quiet necessity they have never been able to fully explain. This is the moment worth sitting with. Because if you are someone who cannot leave the house without making the bed, someone who feels a specific kind of anxiety when things are out of place, someone for whom a messy environment does not just feel aesthetically unpleasant, but feels almost threatening, that response is worth paying attention to. It is not a character flaw. It is not you being difficult or rigid or controlling for the sake of it. It is a nervous system that learned, a very long time ago, that order was how you stayed safe. Now let us talk about the version of this that most people recognize in themselves or in someone they know. Because compulsory cleanliness does not always arrive from obvious trauma. Sometimes it arrives from something more quietly pervasive: anxiety. Anxiety and cleanliness have a well-documented relationship. Not because anxious people are necessarily more organized by temperament, but because cleaning is one of the most immediately effective forms of behavioral self-regulation available to the human brain. When anxiety rises, the body needs to do something with the energy. It needs movement, action, a task with a clear beginning and a clear end, and cleaning provides exactly that. You start with a dirty surface, you end with a clean one. The problem is defined, and then it is solved. In a psychological landscape that often feels undefined and unsolvable, that simple arc of completion is profoundly regulating. This is why so many people find themselves cleaning when they are stressed, anxious, or emotionally overwhelmed. It is not avoidance in the simple sense. It is self-medication. The body is using physical action to discharge emotional tension, and the result is that the home gets cleaner as the inner life gets louder. The issue, of course, is what happens when the cleaning stops working, when the kitchen has been wiped 3 times and the anxiety is still there, when the house is spotless and the internal noise has not quieted. Because cleaning can regulate the nervous system, but it cannot resolve the underlying source of the distress. And when people do not know that, when they have used cleaning as their primary emotional toolkit for long enough, they can find themselves in an exhausting loop. The anxiety rises, they clean. The relief is temporary, the anxiety returns, they clean again. And the house becomes a kind of external mirror of an internal state that is never quite settled. There is another dimension to this that is less about personal psychology and more about something social, something about how we have been taught, quietly and persistently, to connect the cleanliness of our homes to our worth as people. This is particularly powerful for women, though it operates across genders in different ways. The idea that a clean, ordered home reflects a person who has their life together, that mess implies failure. That the state of your kitchen says something meaningful about your character, your capability, your value. These are not thoughts that people consciously choose to hold. They are absorbed from culture, from upbringing, from the particular look someone's parent gave the living room, from the offhand comment a visitor made once that was never forgotten. And when that belief is operating in the background, keeping a clean house stops being just a preference, or even a coping mechanism. It becomes performance. It becomes the ongoing proof you offer to an invisible audience that you are acceptable, that you are competent, that you are the kind of person who deserves to be taken seriously. And the anxiety around disorder is no longer just about comfort or clarity. It is about identity. It is about what happens to your sense of yourself when the countertops are not clean. This is the version of cleanliness that carries the most psychological weight, not because the person is wrong to care about their space, but because their sense of worth has become entangled with something external and temporary, because a home that can be judged is a self that can be judged, and the stakes of that judgment never really feel small. Now let us name the version that lives on the far end of this. Because for some people, the need for cleanliness and order moves beyond preference, beyond coping, beyond even anxiety. into something that genuinely disrupts their quality of life. Contamination fears, ritualized cleaning patterns, the inability to leave a space without completing a sequence of checks and adjustments that must happen in a specific order or must start again from the beginning. Distress that is not proportional to the degree of mess. Time and energy spent cleaning that crowds out other parts of life. These patterns are often associated with obsessive-compulsive disorder, which is far more complex and far more varied than popular culture suggests. OCD does not always look like someone needing symmetry or counting things. For many people, it looks like an overwhelming and relentless sense that something is wrong, something is contaminated, something is not yet safe. That can only be temporarily quieted through cleaning rituals that provide momentary relief before the doubt returns and the cycle begins again. This is not a character trait, it is a clinical experience, and it deserves to be named with the seriousness it carries, not folded into the easy cultural shorthand of being a neat freak or a little OCD, phrases that flatten a genuine and often debilitating psychological reality into something casual and relatable. But for most people who keep their homes clean, the reality sits somewhere quieter than this, somewhere between genuine preference and deeper need. And the most honest thing you can do is be curious about where exactly you are sitting. Ask yourself what happens when you cannot clean, when you are unwell or overwhelmed or simply out of time, and the mess accumulates and you cannot do anything about it. What do you feel? If it is mild discomfort, a preference frustrated, that is one thing. If it is a creeping anxiety, a sense of things coming undone, a feeling that you are somehow losing yourself inside the disorder, that is worth paying attention to. Not with alarm, but with honest curiosity. Because the goal is not to stop caring about your space. A clean and ordered environment genuinely supports mental well-being. The research on that is clear. The goal is to understand the difference between choosing order because it serves you and needing order because without it, you do not feel safe. One is a preference that enhances your life. The other is a coping mechanism that is quietly running it. And if you grew up in that household where order was the only thing you could control, if you have spent years cleaning as a way of managing feelings you did not have other tools for, then part of healing is not learning to live with mess. It is developing more flexible ways to regulate yourself emotionally so that the state of your kitchen does not have to carry so much of the weight. It is learning to sit with uncertainty without immediately reaching for a cloth. It is letting something be temporarily out of place without interpreting that as a signal that everything is falling apart. It is discovering, slowly and with practice, that the safety you were creating through order does not actually live in the surfaces of your home. It lives in you, and it is accessible even when the counters are not wiped. There is something worth honoring here too, because the people who keep their spaces clean are often the same people who show up for others with that same quality of care and attention, who notice when something needs doing and do it without being asked, who create environments where other people feel held and settled and at ease, who understand, at a level they could not always put into language, that the way a space feels matters, that environment shapes experience, that there is a kind of love in making a place feel safe. That instinct is not pathological, it is generous. It is an expression of care that extends outward from the self into the shared world. And when it comes from a healthy place, from genuine pleasure in order rather than fear of disorder, it is one of the quieter and more underrated forms of emotional intelligence. The question is always the same question. Is this serving you or managing you? Is it something you do freely or something you do compulsively? Is the clean house an expression of how you feel or a condition for feeling okay at all? And only you can answer that honestly. But now, perhaps, you have a little more of the language to try. If this video reached something in you that you have not quite had words for before, you are exactly who this channel is made for. This is a space for the quiet psychological patterns that shape the way we live, the way we feel, and the way we understand ourselves. If you want to keep exploring, subscribe and come back. And I am genuinely curious about this one. Is keeping your space clean something that feels like a choice for you, or something that feels closer to a need? Share it in the comments. There is no wrong answer. And you might be surprised how many people are sitting with exactly the same question. Thank you for watching.